Greetings, I'm Ari. We're all waiting to see what's happening in Venezuela right now. And I want to talk to you about a topic that directly connects Israel with what's happening there, in that part of the world. Many people wonder if Israeli intelligence, specifically the Mossad, which deals with everything related, pardon the redundancy, to intelligence, with everything that has to do with Israel abroad, that is all over the world, well, if it has anything to do with the international pressure that is currently being exerted on Maduro and the entire Venezuelan power structure, although it's not always in the headlines, Israeli intelligence is more involved than it appears. United States-Israel Intelligence Cooperation is not new. For decades, both countries have shared operations against terrorism and organized crime. And today, at such a critical moment, that same mechanism is being applied in Latin America. Because Venezuela stopped being just an internal problem of corruption or dictatorship, it has become an operations center for Iran and Hezbollah. And what does this mean in practice? The same groups that attack Israel from Lebanon also finance their activities through drug trafficking in Venezuela. Hezbollah not only fires rockets in the Middle East, it also launders money, manages drug routes, and uses Venezuela as a platform to sustain its machinery. And that's where Israeli intelligence becomes extremely valuable. Identifying those networks, tracking their links, and giving Washington the details needed to build a strong case. Even the Israeli ambassador to Costa Rica said it openly. Hezbollah and radical Iranian groups funded by Tehran operate in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. It's not a theory, it's a reality that Israel monitors closely. That's why, even though there are no reports about joint operations in the Israeli media, we know that there is very close cooperation with the United States to curb these threats. In short, Venezuela is not a distant issue for Israel. What Maduro negotiates with Iran or what Hezbollah moves in the jungles of South America ends up affecting Israel's security. And what scenario? The work of Israeli intelligence becomes key to dismantling networks that, even though they seem hidden, fuel conflicts thousands of kilometers away. And we already know everything that's coming to light, everything that's being revealed about the narco state as Maduro and his associates have been declared. The smartest way the United States has managed to intervene in Venezuela hasn't been with tanks or marines, but with laws. And here's the detail, the key point that many people overlook. Maduro and his entire circle of power are not treated as rulers that would make what the United States intends to do illegitimate. Do they treat him as a drug trafficker or not as a drug trafficker? It has even been declared the regime has even been labeled as a narco state. And this isn't just rhetoric, that change of category suits them. Immediately into judicial and criminal targets, not heads of state with immunity. Under that framework, Washington has built a complete legal structure. Accusations of narco-terrorism, proceedings in federal courts, and a reward scheme that together adds up to more than $100 million for the capture of Maduro, and of key figures like Diosdado Cabello, Tarek Al-Asimani, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, and other generals who are part of the so-called Cartel of the Suns. Obviously, not to mention the star couple, the Rodriguez siblings, who are the ones behind Maduro. This is what makes the Venezuelan case so different, for example, from that of Cuba. It has always been seen as an enemy regime, but its leadership was never directly accused of running an international drug cartel. In contrast, with Venezuela, that label of the Cartel of the Suns gives Washington a solid framework to present the confrontation not as an ideological or political issue, but as a criminal problem on a global scale that directly impacts the United States, effectively turning them into a public enemy of the United States. And this is where the information gathered by various United States intelligence agencies, regional allies, and even the Israeli agency that monitors the movements of Hezbollah and Iran comes into play. It plays a key role in Latin America. It's not about a single piece moving the whole board, but about how. The different sources of intelligence allow prosecutors and judges to build a legal case capable of closing in on the entire power structure in Caracas. What's interesting is that this legal framework not only puts pressure on Maduro and his immediate circle, but also opens the door to much broader scenarios. From freezing the accounts of allies in third countries to prosecuting officials when they try to travel abroad or flee. In short, it's an international siege that keeps tightening without the need to fire a single shot. In these last few weeks, the United States has set up a siege that can't be ignored. An unmatched military deployment. It's not a declared invasion, but it is a military deployment that step by step has been surrounding Venezuela, or rather the leadership of Maduro's narco state. On August 14th, the Pentagon announced the operation. 3 Navy destroyers were deployed to the Caribbean, along with P-8 Poseidon patrol planes and an attack submarine. Squadrons of F-35 and F-18 warplanes were also relocated to bases in the Caribbean and Central America, reinforcing air deterrence capability and making it clear that there is not only maritime surveillance, but also air supremacy. Planes that would take 35 minutes to reach the capital of Venezuela. The second wave occurred on August 20th. The amphibious group led by the helicopter carrier United States ship Iwo Jima set out for the region, accompanied by the United States ship San Antonio and the United States ship Fort Lauderdale. They arrived with more than 4,500 personnel, including 2,200 Marines from the 22nd Division, which is the elite group specialized in raids. For example, going in to capture someone and take them out if that's what's desired. All of them ready for rapid operations from the sea, evacuations, precision strikes, coastal control, and close air support from their own embarked air wing. A reinforcement was announced on August 25th. The cruiser United States ship Lake Erie and the nuclear submarine United States ship Newport News are added, further increasing the precision missile capability, missiles that can go through a window frame, air defense, and submarine deterrence. This deployment does not operate in a vacuum, of course. In Aruba and Curaçao, there is an air coordination center operating with Southern Command. In Puerto Rico, the Coast Guard and the Air Force reinforce maritime and air control. And in Guyana, this year's military exercises consolidated cooperation just east of Venezuela, right next to it. Altogether, this means that the United States can react within hours, if not minutes, with a coverage radius that practically surrounds Caracas. If we look at it in practice, what has happened right now is that all the crossing of the vessels, both above the water and below by the submarines, spells they cast to send their products through the maritime routes from the Venezuelan coasts to the center of America and from there to the United States, well, it was completely cut off. Literally, this entire leadership and all the axes, all the gears of this whole system, of this entire cartel, well, millions and millions of dollars are being lost every day because the merchandise simply isn't getting through. With all the ships and American submarines deployed there, nothing gets through undetected, not even a dolphin. Meanwhile, the Maduro regime tried to show strength. They moved 15,000 soldiers to the border with Colombia, and he spoke again. About 4 to 5 million patriotic militiamen ready to defend the homeland. But there's a detail here that doesn't fit. In the last elections, it was just a little over 3.5 million people who voted for Maduro. If he's really handing out weapons to millions, he's inevitably arming the opposition and the very civilian population that doesn't support him. A measure that, if that's the case, is absolutely irresponsible, and that rather than strength, clearly shows a situation of absolute desperation. Not to mention all the situations, all the images circulating on social media, where everything really becomes quite ridiculous. Also, these figures may not be accurate. The images showing the supposed citizens signing up for the militias seem more like propaganda than real evidence. And that leaves us with another question. How much of what Maduro presents as organized resistance is actually an effective force? How much of it is just trying to hide weakness against the United States' overwhelming military superiority? Many people have a big question. Why not go after Cuba? Is it from there that all of this is controlled? Well, Havana has been the nerve center of intelligence and political advising for Chavismo since the days of Hugo Chavez. We all know that, no one can deny it. But the difference is that the Cuban leadership was never formally accused of running an international drug cartel. On the other hand, the Venezuelan leadership has indeed been accused of drug trafficking and terrorism, which gives the United States a legal framework much stronger to be able to act decisively. In the end, what could happen is that this would simply be a domino effect, expressed in the sense that the moment the leadership that controls all the money falls, Chavez's leadership for the whole cartel. Indeed, unquestionably, this is going to have repercussions in Cuba. And then we'll see how things will be handled at that time with what's left of Fidel's regime established there. All right, another inevitable question. Is it legal for the United States to intervene like this in Venezuela? From an international law perspective, it's illegal. You can't just intervene in a country for no reason. But Washington isn't talking about intervening in a sovereign country. They're talking about pursuing international criminals. That's the move. That legal twist is what changes everything. Because it's no longer about invading Venezuela to go after a president, but about catching narco-terrorists with court orders and multi-million-dollar rewards on their heads. And here's another factor that many people point out, and that's for the United States, and well, for many countries. The legitimate president is Edmundo, not Maduro. And all that intervention has been done by requesting permission from the president that the United States recognizes as the legal president, that is Edmundo. I know many may disagree, but it's not about one person thinking it's good or another thinking it's bad. It's about what is legally possible, and this is possible. As for the neighbors, Petro in Colombia has publicly said without any shame that the Sols cartel doesn't exist. All right, fine. Maybe it doesn't exist as a name, but to deny the existence of a cartel. Call it whatever you want. It's operating not only in Venezuela, but also in Colombia. And it has to be said, that's where 90% of the white powder that reaches the United States comes from. Well, that's another thing. That's really something shameless. With these statements, Petro only ends up taking Maduro's side. And in practice, he exposes Colombia to complicity. That could be very costly if in the future links between Caracas and international criminal organizations are proven. Once all this reaches the courts, the president of Brazil has declared that his country doesn't recognize Maduro as the legitimate president, as he never presented the election records. A message that makes it clear Brazil doesn't want any involvement in this matter and prefers to distance itself from the Chavista regime. At such a delicate moment with its imminent fall, everyone here is starting to turn their backs on the Venezuelan regime. Another question is whether all this will end in a real military intervention or if it's just part of a political show. Because even though the deployment of ships, planes, and marines is truly impressive, also think about the economic cost this demands from the United States. It's also happening in the middle of the election campaign there, raising a big question. What will happen? What if it's seen as an election stunt by Trump? I mean, if nothing ends up happening, could it backfire on him if there's no outcome? Of course, obviously, yes. If this is simply a show and just another act of bravado, as many call it, by President Trump, then this would obviously be a disaster for him. All these are questions that don't have an immediate answer, but they show that Venezuela today is not an isolated case. It is at the crossroads between Washington, Havana, Caracas, Bogota, Brasilia, and even Jerusalem. And all this makes it a much bigger issue than it seems at first glance. Now, what I'm going to present next are not certainties, but scenarios that help to understand where this crisis could move. We're not talking about a single outcome, but about several open paths, each with different risks and consequences. In the end, then, we'll look at where all this leads. First scenario, legal and financial pressure keeps rising until it suffocates the Chavista leadership, which is currently fueled by drug trafficking. The United States has labeled the Cartel of the Suns a global terrorist group. Maduro and his inner circle's reward is nearing $100 million. If you add to that secondary sanctions, more international isolation, and the entire maritime blockade, we'd face an economic and judicial siege. Sooner or later, that could fracture the regime from within, leading to a surrender or a negotiation for exile and handing over power. Second scenario, selective military operations. Washington doesn't need an invasion to send a strong message. It would be enough to capture members of the leadership in third countries or strike key logistical networks inside. These would be surgical moves in the style of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the CIA, or Mossad, showing that no one is safe, not even outside Venezuela. And that leads us to the first scenario, which ultimately generates so much pressure that it results in the surrender or negotiation of the entire leadership of the narco state. Third scenario, Maduro and his inner circle escape or withdraw. In recent days, 3 flights have been detected involving Venezuelan presidential planes heading to Nicaragua. This raises many questions. Who were they carrying? What were they transporting? Some speculate that they were traveling with relatives of high-ranking officials, while others believe they were carrying shipments of gold and cash. There have even been flights that took off and returned minutes later, as if they were tests or distraction maneuvers. All of this, of course, under the watchful eye of the United States. All of this would be nothing more than perhaps confirmation or an indication that the regime is testing, preparing an emergency exit. Fourth scenario, internal betrayal. There are more and more signs that the supposed partners of the narco state are starting to turn their backs on Maduro and Diosdado Cabello and the entire leadership. It wouldn't be surprising if someone within the power structure itself decided to hand over key figures in exchange for protection or benefits. History shows that when the ship starts to sink, the first to jump are those closest to the captain. Fifth scenario, indirect escalation in the region, with 15,000 Venezuelan soldiers now deployed on the border with Colombia. We need to confirm if this is real. At least this is what's being reported on Venezuelan social media. And what about the speeches talking about millions of militiamen? Supposedly attention could shift there before it does in Caracas. A conflict with Colombia would create an unpredictable regional front, giving the United States a perfect excuse to further boost its presence. But now, not by ship or by plane, but maybe by small trucks crossing the border. Sixth scenario, that all of this is part of Trump's electoral policy. A dramatic military deployment in the Caribbean during the campaign. That reinforces the image of a tough stance without a single shot being fired, and that they drag this out for months. The risk is that if there isn't a clear outcome, as we said, the perception that it was all just a show could turn against him, against Trump, and undermine his credibility. The reality is that all these scenarios can also be combined. Tougher sanctions, limited military movements, escape attempts, and even internal betrayals. The only certainty is that the outcome is still unwritten, and with each passing day, the pressure increases and new developments keep emerging. As we can see, Venezuela is at a breaking point. It's not just about a country in crisis, but a hub that's connected to Iran, to Hezbollah, to drug trafficking, and to interests that reach all the way to the Middle East, even here to Israel. What happens there will inevitably shape regional and global politics in the coming months. And of course, it will shape the future of Venezuela and the millions of Venezuelans who right now are making a bigger impact than in a World Cup, so that this can be the long-awaited end of this cancer that has driven them into exile, while the rest of their compatriots agonize in what remains of the country. And faced with this situation, it's natural for all of us to ask questions. How far is the United States willing to go? Will Chavista leadership fall due to international justice, internal betrayal, or military action? What if in the end this is just an electoral show? Alright, let me know your opinion in the comments. I would love to read them. Venezuela can no longer avoid international scrutiny. Today's leadership knows their ability to maneuver shrinks each day they cling to power. Time will tell if they fall due to external pressure, internal divisions, or their own desperate escape. Don't leave without giving a like by clicking the thumbs up. It's free. Subscribe to the channel. That's free too. See you